Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Backlash from the public, specifically rural Texans, pushed Governor Greg Abbott to implement what his administration called a pause on the building of data centers. Earlier this month, he directed the Public Utility Commission of Texas and ERCOT to conduct a comprehensive audit on all data center projects to determine how they are being paid for, how they are providing water and electricity for their projects, and what they are doing to reduce noise and light impacts on nearby property owners. The governor said if data centers don't comply and they fail this audit, their projects will not go forward. The Data Center Coalition sent Governor Abbott a letter saying its organization and all member companies listed on this screen support his initiatives. A poll by Signal shows 82% of Texans support the governor's policy, and another poll by Texas Public Opinion Research shows more than 75% of Texans support requiring large AI data centers to disclose water consumption and avoid overused aquifers, and fund conservation projects, and also fund their own grid upgrades and not pass the costs on to ratepayers. We went one-on-one with Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor Vicki Goodwin of Austin, who told me the governor should call a special legislative session so lawmakers can codify the governor's policy into state law.
We've seen more people come out on this issue than any other in recent days, months, et cetera. And it's because they're concerned about their utility costs going up. They're concerned about the amount of water and electricity that these data centers are using. There's a whole lot of other concerns, but for me, I think it gets back to people worrying about the costs that are going to be pushed back onto them in their households, and the fact that we have given huge subsidies or tax incentives to these companies that really are going to come to Texas regardless of whether they get those tax abatements. We've given sales tax abatements and property tax abatements to these data centers.
So you want to eliminate that, and I know a lot of lawmakers want to eliminate that sales tax incentive.
These companies should stand on their own at this point in time. We see an explosive growth of the data centers, and there's some thought that really the build out we're overbuilding. And so the concern about if some of them are built and aren't used 10 years down the road, is this going to become kind of like our orphan well situation where the companies leave or potentially go bankrupt and we're left, the citizens of the state, to clean up the mess? There's also just vast amounts of water and energy, and there's real concern about how ERCOT will be able to handle this. Our grid has a capacity, and the amount of energy needed for these new data centers far exceeds the capacity that we currently have. Of course, some of the data centers are bringing in their own energy, building gas-powered plants on site or using generators, but we don't have a handle on how much emissions they are producing. And is that being regulated by the Railroad Commission, or is anyone paying attention to that?
Governor Abbott has implemented what his administration describes as a pause on data centers, requiring them to pass a comprehensive audit by the PUC, Public Utilities Commission of Texas, and ERCOT, where they would have to prove that they are paying their own way. They're bringing in and reusing their own water. They're bringing in their own electricity, and they are reducing the impacts of noise and light pollution, nuisances, I guess, if you will, and that they don't cause rate hikes among ratepayers in that area. What's your thought about that?
I mean, I think that's a good step, but I would like to have that put into law. Right now, it's just the governor asking for those things to happen. And what's the enforcement? We need to have the legislature back that up by, again, having a special session, putting this into law, making sure there's some way to enforce what the governor is asking for.
And let me just ask you about the poll. You had one poll that showed you leading Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, 48 to 46%. What was your reaction to that?
Well, obviously, I was really excited to see that poll. I wasn't aware of it until it came out, and that's great news. I think that voters are ready for some change when they know what my policy priorities are. They like what they have to hear. they like what they're hearing. Dan Patrick really has been very quiet on many of these issues. People are upset. They're upset about their schools being underfunded. They're upset about the THC ban that Dan Patrick was about. They're upset about his forcing his one version of his religion on the rest of us. So there's really a lot of voters who are unhappy with Dan Patrick, and thankfully they are starting to learn about Vicki Goodwin.
Republican North Texas Congressman Pat Fallon praised the governor's new policy and said the state needs to listen to residents' concerns.
I share the concerns that a lot of our constituents have. You have to do data centers like anything else smartly. If you don't get local buy-in, then I'm always going to, be predisposed to being with the constituents and residents. If you do a data center where the local population has bought in, the local government has bought in, and the local leaders, then I don't think you really have much of an issue. But when there are concerns, and rightfully so, about noise, about property devaluation, they also want to make sure that you're not taking precious water resources, and you don't want to see your electric bill being increased because there's a giant data center maybe a mile down the street. So if it's done smartly, where the locals buy in, and you could even see a situation where the data centers that are done right, that we don't hear about, that aren't controversial, are the ones that usually go behind the meter, have their own direct energy source, usually with natural gas line that goes right to the data centers to power them, and then recycling their own water, or having very limited water needs. And then even you could see a situation where if they have their own behind the meter energy source, it could actually sell or transfer some of the energy back to the grid, which could decrease property or electric bills. So that's a good thing.
And what do you make of Governor Abbott, him basically putting a pause in place and requiring all the data center developers to, pass a comprehensive audit conducted by the Public Utility Commission of Texas and ERCOT? What do you make of that?
I think it was a thoughtful, good step that the governor put in place. And he was listening to his constituents, over 30 million of them, and they share those concerns, as I do. The fact of the matter is, with AI and quantum and us competing with China, this is something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. And I think in New York State did a complete moratorium where they said there's just not going to be data centers in New York. Well, what if some of those local communities actually wanted them because it was going to create jobs and opportunity and maybe even decrease their electric bills? Again, if done correctly. So I think that was not the smart way to do it, because that's exactly what China wants. They don't want to see data centers in the United States. But I like what the governor did, because you have to do it the right way. You have to get that local buy-in, and if you don't, then you go somewhere else.
And do you think Republicans could be held politically liable for, this backlash in November?
I don't think so, because we are listening to our constituents, and we're saying we agree that you should do these. These are a necessity, but you have to do it the right way.
President Trump described the governor's new policy on data centers as a mistake in an interview earlier this month with Punchbowl News. The president said data centers could be bigger than oil.